My name is Elena Vasquez. I am 34 years old. And for the first 32 years of my life, I believed a story that someone else wrote about me. A story about a man who didn't want me. A man who walked away before I was old enough to remember his face. A man who, according to everyone in my family, had chosen alcohol and chaos over his own daughter. That was the story I was given. Neat. Simple. Final. The kind of story that closes a door so completely you forget there was ever anything behind it. 2 years ago, I found out every word of it was a lie. And the man they told me didn't want me had spent 30 years trying to find his way back to me. Before we get into this, if you are new here, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And drop a comment below telling me where you are watching from. I love reading every single one of them. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the beginning I was told. The real one. I grew up in a suburb of Denver, Colorado. The kind of neighborhood where every house looks almost exactly like the one next to it and the lawns are kept just short enough to signal that everything inside is fine. My mother, Patricia, was organized, precise, and deeply concerned with appearances. She ran the household the way a general runs a campaign. Every meal planned, every schedule maintained, every emotion quietly redirected before it could become inconvenient. My stepfather, Richard Vasquez, came into my life when I was 4. He was steady, reliable, and largely uninterested in me in any way that felt warm. He provided. He showed up. He did not ask me questions about my feelings or my dreams or what I wanted to be when I grew up. He was present the way furniture is present. You notice when it is gone, but you don't often think about it when it is there. I was legally adopted by Richard when I was 6. I don't remember being asked how I felt about that either. I remember being told it was a good thing. That it meant I was really part of the family now. I remember nodding because nodding was what was expected. My younger brother, James, arrived when I was 7. He was Richard's son in every way that word implies, and watching the way Richard looked at him was the first time I understood without language that something in my situation was different. I was not unloved exactly. But I was loved at a distance. From behind glass. In a way that felt careful rather than warm. I asked about my biological father exactly 3 times in my childhood. The first time I was 6. I had found a photograph tucked into the back of a drawer in my mother's closet. A man I didn't recognize holding an infant. The infant was wearing a yellow blanket and the man was smiling so wide that his whole face was involved in it. There was something about his hands in that photo. Large and careful, the way they were wrapped around that tiny body. Like he was holding something he couldn't believe was real. I brought the photograph to my mother. She took it from me without looking at it directly. Put it in her cardigan pocket. And said, "That is nobody you need to worry about." The second time I was 11. A family history project for school. I needed to fill in a family tree and there was a blank space on my mother's side where a name should have been. My biological father's name. I sat at the kitchen table and asked her carefully, the way you learn to ask when you already know the answer might sting. She sat across from me and told me that my biological father had been a troubled man. That he had struggled with alcohol. That he had been inconsistent and unreliable and that the courts had reviewed everything and determined that it was in my best interest to have no contact. She said Richard was my father now and had been since I was 6 and that was the truth that mattered. She was not cruel about it. She was just closed. The way a window is closed. You can see through it but you cannot get in. The third time I was 17. I found his name on a document in a box in our garage. Marcus Ellison. I wrote it down on the inside cover of a notebook and I kept that notebook for 12 years. Marcus Ellison. 2 words that were supposed to mean nothing. They meant everything. I left for nursing school at 18 and I did not move back. Not dramatically. Not with a speech or a slammed door. It was simply obvious in the way some things are. I built my life in Chicago. I became an emergency room nurse. I married a man named Daniel who was patient and funny and believed in me in ways I was still learning how to accept. We had a daughter. We named her Rose. And I told myself that the blank space on one side of my family tree was simply part of the landscape. Something you learn to see around. I told myself that for a very long time. Here is what I did not know. Marcus Ellison and my mother met in the late 80s. They were together 4 years. Happy in the ordinary way that doesn't make for dramatic stories because nothing goes wrong. My mother told me later, after everything came out, that she had loved him simply and without apology. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me about anything. I was born in 1990. Marcus was there. Present, consistent, by all accounts joyful in the specific way that new fathers are joyful when the thing they have been waiting for is finally in their arms. He painted my nursery himself. Butter yellow because my mother couldn't decide between yellow and white and he said, "Let's do both." He bought a rocking chair from a second-hand store and repaired the broken arm himself before she came home from the hospital. He had a playlist ready. Old songs, the kind that felt like they were made for moments exactly like that one. I didn't know any of this until I was 32. They separated when I was 18 months old. Marcus stayed involved. He showed up every single weekend. He paid child support before he was legally required to. He brought me small things. A stuffed elephant he named Gerald because he thought the name was funny and hoped I would too. A board book about colors that he read to me so many times the spine eventually gave out. He was by every measure I now have available to me a present, loving, trying father. Then Richard appeared. My mother was 26, rebuilding after a relationship that had ended without anyone being the villain. Richard was certain about things in a way that felt like safety. He talked about the future with an assurance that my mother found stabilizing. She fell in love with him. I believe that. What I cannot fully reconcile is what happened next. When I was 5, Richard pursued full legal custody of me. The grounds stated were that Marcus was an unfit parent. The evidence included witness testimony describing Marcus as volatile, alcohol-dependent, and a potential danger. Those witnesses were lying. I did not know that for 27 years. Marcus sat in that courtroom with a court-appointed attorney who had too many cases and too little time and watched an entirely false version of himself being constructed and could not stop it. He lost custody. He lost visitation rights. In a subsequent proceeding 2 years later, he lost his parental rights entirely. Terminated. On the basis of a fabricated record. He was erased. Legally. Officially. Completely. He told me later that he sat in his truck outside the courthouse for a long time after it was over. He didn't know where to go. He had a small apartment on the east side of Denver that still had a drawing I'd made on his refrigerator. A house with a very large sun and 2 stick figures. He drove home. He kept the drawing. He kept everything. He never stopped trying to find me. In 2003, he hired a private investigator who tracked an address. A letter was sent. It was intercepted and destroyed before my mother ever saw it. Richard handled that himself. Marcus found that out later and it was, he told me, the moment he understood the full shape of what had been done. He wrote for years afterward. To addresses he wasn't certain were correct. He sent birthday cards to a P.O. box he thought might reach my mother with a note on the back that said only, "Please give this to Elena. Please." He kept copies of everything in a showbox under his bed. 30 years of copies. He never remarried. He built cabinetry for a living. He coached a youth basketball team on Thursday evenings for 11 years. He had friends, a small house, a dog named after a jazz musician. He lived a full life. But there was a specific shape missing from it. The shape of a daughter he was not allowed to know. 8 months before my 32nd birthday, my mother called me. Not a usual call. This was a different kind. The kind where you can hear in the first 2 seconds that the person on the other end has been working up to this for longer than the call itself. She asked if she could come visit. She flew to Chicago on a Thursday. She sat across from me at my kitchen table with a cup of tea she didn't drink and she told me everything. She cried. Not dramatically. Steadily. The way people cry when something has been held so long it has become part of the body and releasing it feels physical. She told me about the false witnesses. She told me that Richard had confessed to her in 2005 that the testimony had been arranged. He had told her because he thought it would make her feel protected. That he had done it for her, for us, for the family. She had been living with it ever since. 17 years of knowing and not saying, and I watched her face while she told me, and I understood something I had not fully understood before. My mother was not the architect of this. She was not innocent. But she was also someone who had been living inside a choice she didn't fully make, carrying a weight that had been handed to her as a gift. "I'm sorry, Elena," she said. "I know that isn't enough." She was right. It wasn't enough. But it was the first true thing she had ever told me about any of it. And it changed everything. I didn't know what to do with what she had given me. I turned it over for weeks. I didn't sleep well. Daniel noticed. He sat beside me in the quiet the way he always did and didn't push and didn't fill the silence, and eventually I told him everything. He listened. When I finished he said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to find him." He nodded. "Then let's find him." It took 6 weeks. Marcus Ellison was not hiding. He was in the same city where I had grown up. He had never left. He had a listed phone number and a small cabinetry business with a website that had a photo of him on the About page. I stared at that photo for a long time. He was in his early 60s. Silver at his temples. He was holding a piece of finished woodwork and smiling at whoever was taking the picture. And I recognized his hands. Large and careful, the way they had been in the photograph I found in my mother's closet when I was 6. I called the number on a Tuesday morning in November. My hands were shaking. The phone rang 3 times and then he picked up and said, "Marcus Ellison." I said, "My name is Elena. I think you might be my father." There was a silence. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. And then he made a sound that I don't have words for. Not a word, not a cry. Something in between. Something that came from a place that had been waiting for 30 years and had not been sure the waiting would ever end. He said, "I know who you are. I have always known who you are." We met for the first time 3 weeks later. A coffee shop near his workshop, his suggestion, public and neutral, no pressure, no expectations. I wore my blue coat and arrived 7 minutes early and sat with my hands around a cup I wasn't drinking. He walked in and I knew him immediately. Not from the photograph on the website. From something older than that. Something that lives below thought. He was in his early 60s. A little shorter than I had imagined. He was wearing a dark green jacket and carrying a small paper bag, and he stopped when he saw me, and for a moment neither of us moved, and then he walked over and he said, "You have your grandmother's eyes." My mother's. She passed in 2015. She would have loved to see this. I didn't know what to say, so I said, "I brought you something." And I handed him a photograph. Me and Daniel and Rose at the beach last summer. Rose was laughing, head thrown back, completely delighted by something out of frame. He took the photograph and looked at it for a long time, and then he reached into the paper bag he was carrying and set something on the table between us. A drawing. Old, fragile at the folds, in a clear plastic sleeve. A house with a very large sun in the corner and 2 stick figures. One small, one tall. Under the tall figure, in the handwriting of a 2-year-old, guided by an adult hand, "My daddy." I pressed my hand over my mouth. "I've carried that for 30 years, he said. "I never stopped believing I'd get to give it back to you someday. I want to stop here and say something to anyone who is watching this who has a story that looks anything like mine. If you have spent years being told that someone didn't want you, that they walked away, that they were the problem, I need you to hear this. Sometimes the story you were given was written by someone with an agenda. Sometimes the people who were supposed to protect you protected something else instead. Their image. Their choices. Their comfort. That does not mean you were unwanted. It may simply mean that the truth was kept from you by people who were afraid of what it would cost them. You deserve to know the truth. Even if it comes late. Even if it arrives in a coffee shop when you are 32 years old with shaking hands and a blue coat and a photograph in your pocket. Truth doesn't always come on time. But it comes. There are things I am still sorting through. My anger at Richard is something I have not fully resolved. He is still alive. He is still married to my mother. They live in the same house in Denver and the lawn is still kept exactly the right length. He has not apologized to me. He sent a card, Once, after my mother told him I knew. It said, "I hope we can move forward as a family." I have not responded. Some things take longer than others. My mother and I are in a different place than we were. Closer in some ways. More honest. She calls more often. She asks about Rose. She came to visit last spring and she and Marcus met in my living room and I watched them look at each other across 30 years of complicated silence, and something passed between them that I was not part of and did not need to be part of. They were two people acknowledging the full weight of something. That was enough. My brother James does not fully understand what happened or how to respond to it. He is not cruel about it. He just grew up in a different family than I did. His father is still his father. The ground beneath him is not shifting the way mine shifted. I try to be patient. He is trying in his own way. Marcus and I have met 14 times now. We have coffee. We go for walks. We talk carefully and sometimes we talk easily. We are building something at a pace that feels right for two people who missed 30 years and are navigating the architecture of that with honesty and without rushing. He showed me the showbox. He brought it to our 4th meeting. Set it on the table in the coffee shop without ceremony. Inside were the copies of every letter he had sent. Every birthday card. Every document from the court proceedings. The report from the private investigator. A photograph of me as an infant asleep on his chest. Another one of him reading to me, that board book about colors, the one with the worn-out spine. He had kept all of it for 30 years. Not out of obsession. Not out of bitterness. But because he believed that someday he would get to give it back to me. That someday I would want to know that someone had been trying. He was right. I sat in that coffee shop and I went through every piece of that box while Marcus sat across from me and drank his coffee and let me take as long as I needed. And when I got to the last letter at the bottom of the pile, the one dated 6 months before I found him, I looked up at him. "You never stopped," I said. He shook his head. "You were always worth looking for." Rose calls him Pop Pop Marcus. She decided that on her own, the 3rd time she met him. She marched up to him with the full confidence of a 4-year-old who has not yet learned that life can be complicated, held out a drawing she had made, and said, "This is for you, Pop Pop Marcus." He took it. He held it the way he had held me in that photograph from 30 years ago. Like something he couldn't believe was real. He has it on his refrigerator now. Right next to the old one that survived 30 years in a showbox. Daniel says he has never seen me look the way I look when Marcus is in the room. He says it is like watching someone understand for the first time that they were always worth loving. I don't know if that is exactly right. But I think it is close. There is something I keep coming back to. In all the years my mother maintained that story, in all the years the door was kept closed, in all the years I told myself the blank space on my family tree was simply part of the landscape, Marcus was out there. Living his life. Building things with his hands. Coaching basketball on Thursday evenings. Sending letters into the quiet. Keeping the drawing in the showbox. He never turned his pain into poison. He never used what was done to him as a reason to stop trying. He just kept going. Quietly. Steadily. With a kind of faith that I find difficult to fully account for. He believed I would come back. He believed it for 30 years. And he was right. If you are watching this and you have a story that looks like mine, I need you to hear something. The person who was kept from you may not be who you were told they were. The story you were given may have been written by someone whose first priority was not your truth. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to look. You are allowed to want to know. Even now. Even after all this time. It is not too late. And if you are the one who was kept away, the one who sent letters that never arrived, the one who kept copies in a showbox and never stopped believing, I need you to hear this too. Keep going. Keep trying. Keep the drawing. Because somewhere there is a daughter. A son. A person who grew up with a blank space on their family tree and a question they were never allowed to ask out loud. And they deserve to know that someone never stopped looking. I walked into that coffee shop on a Tuesday in November with shaking hands and a photograph in my pocket. I walked out with a father. Late. But not too late. That is the thing about truth. It does not always arrive on schedule. It does not always come wrapped in the way you expected or at the moment you needed it most. But when it finally shows up, it doesn't need an invitation. It doesn't need to explain itself or apologize for the delay. It just sits down across from you in a green jacket with a paper bag and a 30-year-old drawing in a clear plastic sleeve, and it looks at you with your grandmother's eyes. And it says, "I have always known who you are." And finally, after all this time, you believe it. That is my story. If this video reminded you that it is never too late to find the truth or to be found by it, share it with someone who needs to hear that today. Drop a comment below. Hit subscribe. And I will see you in the next one.